can detachment, or rather unattachment, help us find and return to a state of inner peace? Thousands of years of ancient Eastern wisdom would say yes, and I have found this to be true for myself as well. But first, let us begin with a brief, interesting, juicy quote. Ultimately, there is no separation between reality and delusion. In other words, reality includes delusions. By Shuhaku Okamura, Living by Vow. What the heck does that mean? In short, perception is deception. Anything that we're perceiving, we only have a limited ability to process, intake, and integrate information coming in. So every opinion we have is wanting. Every opinion we have is lacking. There's always going to be something that we're missing. So the perception we have of ourselves, the perception we have of other people, of situations, of events, of places, of things, it is always true, but also untrue, because it can never contain the full amount of isness that actually exists. And so when we remind ourselves that perception is deception and that all reality includes our own delusions and the delusions of others, it can humble us and thus allow us to take a step back and practice the art of unattachment and the virtue of acceptance. Coming at you next. Welcome back, everyone. My name is Alaric Hutchinson, also known as the Zen Cowboy, and this is my series where we're reading chapters from my book, Heart of Humanity, an introduction to the healing path of Dunisha, and I'm providing commentary after each little segment. So today we're going to be exploring the virtue of acceptance and how attachment and detachment and unattachment all come together and create or alleviate the emotional turmoil that many of us face on a day-to-day basis. This is one of my favorite, most succinct chapters. So let's go ahead and take a deep breath and dive right in. Virtue 3, the flower of acceptance. Page 100. When it comes to emotional mastery, the core virtue we need to cultivate is acceptance. To begin, unattachment, not detachment, is a helpful mindset to cultivate when nurturing acceptance. It's quote, letting go, end quote. So before we become overly attached to someone or something, we learn to embrace and accept the true nature of reality, which is impermanence. When we forget this deep truth of reality, we suffer emotionally. Let's break that apart for a moment. So, learning to embrace and accept the true nature of reality, which is impermanence. What does that mean? So impermanence is that nothing lasts. Everything is in a constant state of change. And when we forget that, that's when we suffer emotionally. We suffer emotionally because of at least our Dunisha approach to ego, which is what I call the push, pull, hold, tight, the three aspects of ego. We're constantly always pushing against the things we don't like. We're pulling, grasping for the things we do like, or we're holding tight to the things that we fear letting go or fear of change, sentimentality, all that jazz. Many of us here in the West, because we're so identity focused here, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but when we're so identity focused, we make all these mental and emotional constructs of who we are and who we expect others to be. And when things don't go according to plan, boy, howdy, do we get upset. To put it lightly. And that causes a lot of pain. And so whatever our perceived identity is, whether it's high or whether it's low, whether we're in arrogance or whether we're in self-pity and self-judgment, all of that, going back to the beginning of the video, is a bit of deception. We are getting so attached to some idea of who we are or what other people are, it causes a lot of strife. But when we take a step back and we realize that this is one of actually my favorite mantras, I don't need to have an opinion about this. Or I don't need to have an opinion about this person. Or maybe I don't even need to have an opinion about myself. So when I practice a little bit of unattachment, which is caring deeply about things and people, but not letting them control us or influence us so strongly emotionally, that is allowing us to take steps toward inner peace. So when I drop my opinions, when I'm surrounded by people and I'm just accepting them for who they are and whatever color they're manifesting as that day, it is so easy to just be at peace. And I absolutely, absolutely adore this teaching because it sets ourselves free and it lets other people off the hook. Yeah, it still sucks when I have an excitement around something and it doesn't go as planned, or someone that I care about becomes distant or passes away. Like, we don't become unemotional. We just remember the true nature of reality, that everything is impermanent and all things are constantly changing and nothing stays the same forever. And when we forget that, that's when we lose our grace. That's when we get so bound up in fear that we start to resist life rather than embracing all of its deliciousness. I tell you what, I have had so many broken hearts because I have opened my heart up to so many people. And yeah, every single time it still stings, but it does not last forever. Because just as the joy of life does not always last forever, so too does the sorrow not always last forever. And one of my favorite reflections is that if my cup never empties, then nothing else can ever come in. So the friendships that I have today and so love would not exist today if I was still 100% friends with every single person I met in elementary school and we stayed best buds. That would have meant no room for any other connections in my life. Same thing with my previous husband and whoever I become partners with in the future again. Joy was once, joy will be again, just as sorrow was once, sorrow will be again. And the more we accept this, the more we can find our way to inner peace. Let's go ahead and take a deep breath. So this next section, let me show you real quick. There's a few definitions I'm going to share. And this is our Dunisha approach to these definitions. So attachment. Clinging to someone or something, which often causes suffering by becoming mentally and emotionally swept up in a tide of strong thoughts and feelings. Detachment. Aloof, uncaring, distant in mind, distracted, intentionally avoidant due to unprocessed emotions. And then we have unattachment, which is what we emphasize. Caring deeply but choosing not to let a person, situation, or thing affect one's mental or emotional well-being, which is achieved by processing all emotions around the person, situation, or thing. Let's take a breath. By remaining unattached to the circumstances and the people of our life being a certain way, it's much easier to develop an accepting heart and mind toward all that shows up or fades away. Unattachment in Dunisha does not mean being uncaring or aloof. That's detachment. Unattachment is simply the awareness and acceptance of things outside our control, still caring or loving, but not letting things influence us emotionally. By contrast, attachment is when we become emotionally tangled up in people and situations, so much so that the changing tides and whims of the world sap our emotional strength. And this is a tough practice, this virtue of acceptance, because we care so deeply. I can't tell you how many mothers I have worked with who always say, Alaric, you are just not a mother yourself, and so you don't know what it's like to care so deeply about someone. And yes, there is certainly a different bond between parents and children. But the truth is, this is a universal thing. This whole attachment, unattachment, detachment, we are always being hooked by something or someone that is drawing our attention. And it might not necessarily even be love-oriented. It could be something that is hate-oriented. It could be something that is so frustrating that we can't get it out of our mind. So it doesn't matter where we're falling on the emotional spectrum of things that are pulling us, that are clinging to us, or rather we're hooking into them, that's causing the attachment and thus losing our emotional equilibrium over them. The teaching's the same. It doesn't matter what it is. It's about taking a breath, taking a step back, and practicing unattachment, which is remembering the true nature of reality. impermanence, and also remembering that all reality includes delusions. So our opinions and our desire and our strong want for things to be a certain way, and when it's not, that's what causes the suffering. And yet, when we take a step back and accept and love unconditionally, boom, we're set free. There's an old saying that when you want a duck to be a chicken, boy, howdy, are you going to suffer. Because that's not what it is. You can want it till the cows come home and it's still not going to be, the duck is still not going to be a chicken. So the same can be said for if you want a certain boyfriend to be a certain way, you want a parent to be a certain way, if you want your parent to love you a certain way, or you want your child to do an XY thing in the future, or you want your spouse to treat you a different way, all of these things, yes, we can have these wants, we can have these desires, but when we are literally going up in resistance to reality and disagreeing with what it's actually showing us, that's where we get tricky. That's where we get the hook, where we get so pulled in and trying to manipulate or change the situation, when in actuality, if we were more like water and allowed ourselves to flow and to mold around the situation, that can be a lot more freeing. And sometimes we might just need to flow on past and move on to the next valley altogether. But all of these things come hand in hand with this virtue of acceptance. Are we in acceptance or are we in resistance? Let's take a breath. Throughout life, pain will occur. But please remember that the amount of pain we suffer due to discomfort, loss, and change is determined by our mind. Being in a constant state of mental resistance, aka pushing against unwanted things, causes unremittent stress and increases suffering. Being in a constant state of mental acceptance has the reverse effect, allowing us to move through difficulties without becoming emotionally wrapped up in them. And again, please remember that acceptance is not aloofness or apathy. It is an intentional mental state in which we are acutely aware of what is going on, but we choose to flow with, adapt, and readily let go of things, or to make changes when necessary, instead of always dragging our heels every step of the way, being stubborn or aggressive toward change. So obviously I'm more Buddhist, aka the Zen Cowboy, than Christian, but one story that I deeply appreciate and love about Christianity is Jesus' walking on water, because it is a fantastic metaphor of an enlightened being walking on the stuff, the mundane stuff that we as humans drown in. But as he taught everything that he could do, so can we. We have that gift of God within us that can allow us to rise above, to transcend all of the drama, all of the bullshit, all of the stuff that many of us often succumb to, become washed over by, and drown in. We too can walk on water. We too can walk on the stuff that normally would consume us. And that is the metaphor, at least how I interpret that text, in how the choice at the end of the day is ours. Are we actually practicing compassion? Are we practicing forgiveness? Are we practicing acceptance? These universal, beautiful teachings that many of the world religions invite us to embody. Are we actually coming into our heart and giving grace? Or are we in a state of fight, flight, resistance, chasing after, manipulation, trying to control, when at the end of the day, really all we can do is either love and let go or continue the fight? And often it is the continuing of the fight that causes more harm and suffering on the planet. A favorite quote of mine by Basho is, it's a haiku, and it goes something along the lines of, sitting quietly, doing nothing, spring comes and the grass grows by itself. Every year, the seasons change and life continues on with or without me. And I think that's very humbling and beautiful to remember. Let's take a breath. Students new to the Dunisha teachings sometimes dismiss this virtue, along with mastery of emotion at first. They still want to cling to and wallow in their emotions, certain that consistent peace is, quote, unexciting or, quote, boring. They may mistakenly believe that being too peaceful would make them unemotional robots. In fact, the exact opposite is true. When we are easily swayed by our emotions, we rarely get to experience the full range of them because the pendulum swings of highs and lows exhausts us, or anger and grief dull our sensitivities. When we master this virtue and its corresponding tenet, we find that maintaining our harmonious state with our emotions actually allows us to be fully present for them. Then we can truly experience and savor the joys of life that we were too distracted to witness or appreciate before. I love that. And it's so important to remember. Do not get caught up in this, we'll go back to the beginning, the delusion that peace is boring or unexciting. Boy, howdy, I was just at maybe a month ago, a rave, and I was fully sober, and I danced till 4:30 in the morning because I was so full of joy. I don't think I view myself as a boring individual. Everyone else around me was high, and that's fine. That's their journey. For me, I practice sobriety, but I could keep up with them, and I had an absolute blast. And the reason for that was that I don't have any more hangups around insecurity. I just do what I want to do. And by being able to do that and just have that self-assurance through emotional regulation and not have those extreme highs and lows, that's what allows me to tap into joy so readily. But in equal measure, if something horrible happens, a tragedy strikes, I don't shy away from it. I don't numb myself through addiction or some kind of substance that might take the edge off. I will lean into it and fully process and go through the emotions. So please always remember that peace and practicing these teachings does not dull your sensitivities. It actually magnifies them while also giving you the ability to process them more readily. Let's breathe that in. If you liked what I talked about today, please consider supporting me by ordering a copy of my book, Heart of Humanity, on Amazon. It is full of so many juicy other nuggets, and a lot of these chapters are bite-sized to read, so even just one a night is an excellent way to really marinate our brains and to learn more about the peace practice that we can do on a daily basis. And as I mentioned in the last video, we also just restarted our Facebook group, the Dunisha Sanctuary Online, where I'll be posting weekly content and weekly opportunities to engage with one another and students from around the world who are practicing this as well. It'd be wonderful to nurture this online community where we can practice peace together. Thank you all so much, and I'll see you next week. Mwah.